The battlefield was silent now, but it had not always been this way. Just hours ago, it had been full of noise, explosions, gunfire, and the screams of soldiers from both sides. Now, the only sound was the wind whistling through the broken buildings and scattered debris. The ground was soaked with blood, and the air smelled of smoke and death. Captain Eric Hayes stood at the edge of the battlefield, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. He was tired. His uniform was torn, his face covered in dirt and sweat. The war had been going on for years, and today it had taken another heavy toll. His unit had just won a hard-fought battle, but there was little to celebrate. So many lives had been lost, human and alien alike. "All clear, Captain," one of Eric's men, Sergeant Taylor, said. His voice was tired, his expression empty. Eric nodded but didn't respond. He was lost in thought, staring out at the wasteland in front of him. The once thriving city had been reduced to rubble, buildings crumbling under the weight of destruction. It was hard to imagine that just a few months ago, people had lived here. Now, it was just a graveyard for both sides of the war. "Let's move out," Eric ordered. The soldiers in his squad began to gather their gear, ready to leave the battlefield. But as they turned to walk away, something caught Eric's eye. A figure, barely moving, lay on the ground near the center of the battlefield. At first, Eric thought it was just another casualty, but then he saw the strange shape of the body. The tall, thin figure, with skin as pale as the moon. It wasn't a human. "Wait," Eric called out to his team, his voice steady but filled with an unusual sense of urgency. He quickly moved toward the figure, his soldiers following hesitantly behind him. As he got closer, Eric's heart began to pound. The creature was alive, barely. Its body was covered in deep crimson wounds, blood leaking from the gashes in its skin. It had the features of an alien, a long face with sharp cheekbones, a high forehead, and piercing red eyes that flickered as though the life was slowly fading from them. But this wasn't just any alien. This was a Vraxis, an alien vampire warrior. The Vraxis were feared by all. They were known for their brutal strength and their ability to regenerate quickly, making them nearly impossible to kill. Their kind was ruthless in battle, but they had a code of honor, one that Eric had never fully understood. "Captain, what is that?" Sergeant Taylor asked, his voice filled with confusion and fear. Eric didn't answer right away. He crouched down beside the creature, his eyes scanning its body. There was no mistaking it. This was a Vraxis warrior, one of the strongest soldiers in the alien army. But why was it here, lying on the ground, abandoned by its own people? "You need to finish it, Captain," Sergeant Taylor said, his voice shaking. "It's a Vraxis. They don't deserve mercy." Eric looked at the creature again, his gaze hardening. He had seen his fair share of enemies, but there was something about this one that felt different. It wasn't just another alien warrior. This one was dying, and for some reason, Eric couldn't bring himself to end its life. As if sensing Eric's hesitation, the Vrax's eyes opened slightly, staring directly at him. The red glow in its eyes was weak, barely noticeable. "Please," the Vraxis whispered, its voice raspy and full of pain. "Help me. I don't want to die here." Eric froze. The alien's voice was weak, but there was something in it, a hint of desperation. He had never heard an enemy speak like this before. The Vraxis were always so cold, so fierce. But this one sounded human. "Captain?" Sergeant Taylor asked again, his voice filled with worry. "We can't just leave it here. It will kill us all." Eric stood up slowly, looking back at his men. They were all watching him, waiting for a decision. Most of them were ready to walk away, to leave the alien to die, as it was the most logical choice. The Vraxis had fought against them for years, killing countless soldiers on both sides. But something inside Eric stopped him. He couldn't just leave the alien to die alone. It wasn't in him. "We can't leave it," Eric said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "What?" Sergeant Taylor asked, his voice rising. "You can't be serious, Captain. If we take it with us, we'll be labeled traitors. The higher-ups will never forgive you." "I know," Eric replied, his voice firm but low. "But we can't just kill it. It's different." The Vraxis made a soft, pained sound, and Eric turned back to see it struggling to raise its head. Its red eyes were now wide, looking at Eric with something that could almost be described as trust. "Please," the alien whispered again. "I am not your enemy. I only fought to protect my people." Eric's heart tightened. He didn't know why, but he believed it. There was something about the way the alien spoke, the way it looked at him, that made him believe this creature was not the same as the other Vraxis warriors he had fought. "Help me," the alien repeated, weaker now. "If you leave me here, I will die. Alone." Eric knew this was dangerous. He knew helping this alien could cost him everything: his career, his life, his loyalty to his people. But he also knew something else. He couldn't walk away. With a sigh, Eric made his decision. He bent down and carefully lifted the Vraxis into his arms, trying not to hurt it further. "Come on," Eric said quietly. "We're getting you out of here." As Eric turned to walk away, his soldiers stood in silence, unsure of what to do. But no one spoke up. They knew their captain well enough to understand that once he made up his mind, there was no changing it. Eric stumbled through the ruins, his grip tight around the injured Vraxis. The alien was surprisingly light despite its height, and its breathing was shallow, each exhale a soft rasp in the silence. The city around them was a ghost of its former self. Once a place of bustle and life, it was now nothing more than a broken shell, filled with the echoes of past battles. There was no place to hide here, but Eric couldn't risk returning to the main camp. If his men spoke to their superiors, his act of mercy would be seen as treason. Where are we going?" the Vraxis asked, its voice weak but insistent. Eric glanced down at the alien, noticing how pale it looked, its body growing colder by the minute. "You need blood," Eric said, almost to himself. He had no plan, no clear idea of what he was doing, but the alien was still alive, and that meant something. He couldn't let it die. "I can wait," the Vraxis replied, its voice strained. "I do not need your pity." Eric shook his head, not wanting to listen to its pride. He had seen enough soldiers, human and alien, die in his time. He wasn't going to let this one die just because of its pride. "We're not doing this because I pity you," Eric said quietly. "We're doing this because, I don't know, because I can't leave you here to die." The alien let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You humans are strange. You fight to the death for your people, but you risk everything for an enemy." Eric remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Was he really risking everything for this creature, or was there something else pulling at him? Something deeper. They moved through the wreckage of the city, Eric keeping his eyes open for any sign of danger. The streets were empty, the buildings like hollowed-out skeletons. But Eric knew better than to trust silence. He couldn't let his guard down, not when everything was at risk. As they moved deeper into the city, Eric's thoughts drifted to the battlefield they had just left. His squad was still out there, and his commander would surely be furious when they found out what Eric had done. If they found out. Eric had set the distress signal to a hidden outpost before leaving, but there had been no response. He had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just him and the Vraxis now. "We'll find a place to hide," Eric muttered, more to reassure himself than the alien. "I'll get you to safety." The Vraxis didn't respond at first, and Eric wasn't sure if it had heard him. The alien's head rested against his shoulder, and its breathing became more shallow. It was still alive, but barely. Eric cursed under his breath. Time was running out. Suddenly, the Vraxis stirred in his arms, lifting its head slightly. "There is a place," it said, its voice barely audible. "A shelter, not far from here." Eric frowned, surprised by the alien's suggestion. "You know of a place?" The Vraxis nodded weakly. "Yes, it is a hidden refuge. The humans will not know it." Eric was skeptical. He didn't trust the Vraxis, not completely. But it was their only chance. He had no other plan. Without thinking, he adjusted his grip on the alien and started moving faster. If this shelter was real, it might be their only hope. They moved through the ruins in silence, the wind picking up as they got closer to the coordinates the Vraxis had given. Eric kept his eyes darting around, alert to every sound. He knew they couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. "Why won't you help me?" the Vraxis asked suddenly, its voice stronger now, though still tinged with pain. "We are enemies. My kind has killed many of your people." Eric glanced down at it. "Because not all enemies deserve to die," he said simply. The Vraxis seemed to consider that, its red eyes narrowing. "You humans are strange. You claim to be warriors, yet you are capable of mercy. It is confusing." Eric shrugged, not knowing how to explain. He wasn't sure he understood it himself. All he knew was that this alien, this Vraxis, was not like the others he had fought. There was something different about it. Maybe it was just the situation they were in. Or maybe he was just desperate to save someone, anyone, after all the destruction he had seen. As they walked, Eric noticed something strange. Despite the alien's injuries, it was becoming more alert, more aware. Its once faded red eyes were now glowing brighter. It wasn't fully healed, but it seemed to be recovering. "How are you?" Eric started, but the Vraxis interrupted him. "Do not ask," it said sharply. "I do not owe you an explanation." Eric didn't press further. He had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let others keep their secrets. The last thing he needed right now was an argument with the alien. They had enough problems as it was. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the shelter, a small, hidden compound built into the side of a mountain. The entrance was well camouflaged, and Eric could see how it could remain hidden from both human and alien forces. The Vraxis managed to stand on its own for a moment, its legs shaky, but it seemed to be able to walk. Inside, it said, its voice hoarse. Eric helped the Vraxis inside, and once they were safe in the shelter, Eric began to look around for anything useful. There was little in the way of supplies, just some old equipment and basic medical supplies. But it was enough to keep them alive for a while. The Vraxis sat down against the wall, its breathing slow but steady now. "I told you," it said, glancing up at Eric, "I am not your enemy." Eric knelt beside it, his gaze hard. "You're still my enemy. But right now, we're both just trying to survive." The Vraxis gave him a small, tired smile. "We may not be so different after all." Eric didn't respond. Instead, he set about preparing what little he could. They had a long road ahead of them, and he wasn't sure if they could trust each other. But for now, they had no choice. "Rest," Eric said, looking at the Vraxis. "We move again at first light. We're not out of danger yet." The alien nodded, though it didn't speak. Eric watched it for a moment, feeling a strange weight on his shoulders. He had made a choice today, and now he would have to live with it. The shelter was cold, its walls made of stone, and the air smelled musty from years of abandonment. It was the perfect hideout, and yet, despite its safety, Eric couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. He couldn't relax. Not yet. The Vraxis, though still weak, had rested for hours. Eric had given it what little medical supplies he could find. But he knew that without proper treatment, the alien would not recover fully. Eric paced the small space, his boots echoing in the silence. The Vraxis lay against the wall, its red eyes flickering open now. And then, watching Eric with an intensity that made him uneasy. It was hard to trust the alien, but something about the creature made Eric feel as though they shared an unspoken bond. Still, Eric knew that every minute they stayed here was another minute the enemy would be closing in. "Do you think they'll find us?" Eric asked, breaking the silence. He turned toward the Vraxis, who seemed to be in a deep thought. The alien's voice was hoarse, but it carried an undeniable sharpness. "The humans are too busy fighting their own wars to care about a single soldier. But your commanders will send someone to track you down, eventually." Eric nodded. The Vraxis was right. His own people had no tolerance for traitors. Helping an alien, especially one as dangerous as a Vraxis, would have consequences. He had no doubt that, soon enough, his actions would catch up with him. He couldn't run forever. "But what about you?" Eric asked. "Won't your people come for you?" The Vraxis closed its eyes for a moment, its breathing slow but steady. "My people have already abandoned me. I was left to die on the battlefield. The moment I showed any sign of weakness, they turned their backs on me. They care little for the weak." The words cut through Eric like a blade. He had heard the rumors about the Vraxis, about their ruthless code, and how they valued strength above all. The Vraxis were warriors, and showing weakness was the ultimate sin. The thought of being discarded by one's own people, because of a moment of vulnerability, made Eric feel a strange sense of pity. But he didn't voice it. Instead, he focused on the situation at hand. Eric moved toward the small window, peering outside. The landscape was still, but the silence felt wrong. The stillness in the air was broken only by the occasional distant explosion or the sound of wind rustling through the rubble. "It's too quiet," Eric muttered, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. "We've been here too long." "You're paranoid," the Vraxis said with a faint, tired smile. "But I understand. There is danger in the air. I can feel it too." Eric didn't share the Vraxis' calm. His mind raced with thoughts of their next move. They couldn't stay here much longer. And yet Eric had no idea where to go. The rebel outpost he had tried to contact had not responded. For all he knew, it could have been destroyed or compromised. They were alone now. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the tension. The unmistakable sound of boots marching. Eric's heart skipped a beat. They had been found. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder. The footfalls of more than one person, marching in sync, were getting closer. Eric's first instinct was to run, but he knew that would only make them a target. His second instinct was to hide, but there was nowhere to hide in the shelter, no way to escape without being seen. "The soldiers are here," Eric whispered urgently, looking at the Vraxes. "We have to move." But the alien didn't move. It just lay there, its red eyes gleaming with a strange, calm confidence. "You run, human. I am not your burden. If they want me, let them come. I am no weakling." Eric's mind raced. He didn't have time for pride right now. They both needed to survive. He crouched beside the Vraxis and grabbed it by the arm, trying to pull it to its feet. "We're in this together. We survived together. You're not getting off that easy." The Vraxis growled, but there was something almost grateful in its eyes. It knew, as Eric did, that survival meant more than pride. "Fine," the Vraxis said, "but I cannot fight at full strength. Not yet." "That's fine," Eric said, pulling the alien to its feet. "We don't need to fight. We just need to run." Before they could move, the door to the shelter creaked. The sound of boots on stone grew louder. Someone was close. Too close. The enemy was right outside. Eric pushed the Vraxis toward the back of the shelter, where a small passage led deeper into the mountain. "Go. I'll hold them off. Find a way out. I'll meet you." The Vraxis hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Be quick, human. I will not wait long." With one last glance, the Vraxis disappeared into the darkness of the passageway. Eric stood, heart pounding, knowing he was about to face the enemy alone. His hands gripped the weapon at his side, his breath coming faster with each passing second. The door burst open, and a group of human soldiers entered the shelter. Eric's stomach twisted. His commander stood at the front of the group, his face hard with anger. "There you are, Captain Hayes," the commander said coldly. "We've been looking for you." Eric's mind raced. He had no plan for this. There was no escape. He had to fight his way out. "Captain," the commander said again, his tone softer now, almost pitying. "You've betrayed us. You've betrayed your people." Eric clenched his jaw, raising his weapon. "You don't understand. I couldn't just leave him to die. He's not like the others." The commander's eyes narrowed. "You gone soft, Hayes. But this ends now." Before Eric could respond, the commander motioned to his men. The soldiers began to advance, their weapons raised. Eric's heart raced. He knew what he had to do, fight or die trying. But then, just as the soldiers were about to close in, a voice echoed from behind them. "Stop." It was the Vraxis. The soldiers froze, their weapons still raised, eyes darting toward the figure standing at the entrance of the shelter. The Vraxis emerged from the shadows, its red eyes glowing like fire in the dim light. Its once weak form now stood tall and imposing, a silent promise of danger radiating from its very presence. Eric's heart skipped a beat. The alien had somehow found strength, and it wasn't the same one that had been near death just hours ago. The Vraxis was now a force to be reckoned with, and Eric wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. The commander's eyes widened in shock. You should be dead." The Vraxis tilted its head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible smile curving its lips. "You humans are always so quick to judge. But I'm not dead. Not yet." Eric's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't take his eyes off the commander. This was a delicate moment. The Vraxis had just saved him, but now there were new problems to face. The soldiers might not take kindly to the alien's sudden reappearance. "Commander," Eric said, trying to sound calm, though his heart was racing. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. We're not enemies." The commander scoffed, his grip on his own weapon tightening. "You've turned traitor, Captain. You've sided with the Vraxis, and that's a crime in itself. This ends now." Eric's eyes darted between the commander and the soldiers. There were 6 of them, all well-armed and ready to fight. He was outnumbered. He had no backup. But he wasn't alone anymore. The Vraxis stepped forward, its gaze fixed on the soldiers, the air around it seeming to hum with power. "If you want him," the alien said, its voice steady and cold, "you'll have to go through me." Eric's mind raced. He knew what would happen next. The Vraxis had no intention of backing down, and the soldiers would see this as a threat. He could already sense the tension building, the soldiers' fingers twitching on their triggers. The commander raised his hand to stop them. "Hold," he said, his voice hard. "We don't need to escalate this. We're here to bring Hayes back, not start a war. Let him come with us, and we'll let this go." Eric's eyes narrowed. "You're lying. If I go with you, I'll be executed. You know it, and I know it." The commander's face darkened. "If you surrender now, it'll be easier for you. The court-martial will be quick. You'll have a chance to defend yourself. But the Vraxis is a threat that must be dealt with, and I won't let you endanger the lives of your comrades, Captain." The Vraxis chuckled darkly. "You speak as though we are the ones who started this war. You're mistaken, human. Your people attacked us first, and now you expect mercy." The commander didn't flinch, though his eyes showed a flicker of doubt. "This war has gone on long enough, and it's time to end it. You're the ones who've taken things too far. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies." Eric could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke. Every second felt like an eternity. The Vraxis stood like a stone wall, its eyes locked on the soldiers, daring them to make a move. Eric wasn't sure how much longer this standoff could last before violence erupted, but in that moment, he knew that he had no choice but to act. "Eric," the commander barked, his voice hard with authority, "don't make this harder than it has to be. Step away from the alien, and come with us now." Eric's hand hovered over his weapon, but his mind raced, his thoughts in a whirl. The Vraxis had saved his life, and now it was offering to protect him from his own people. But what cost? Could he really allow this alien to take the blame for everything? Was it worth the bloodshed? The Vraxis took a step forward, its posture shifting from defensive to aggressive. "You are the one who refuses to understand. We are not your enemies, but we will be if you force our hand." Eric's heart thudded in his chest as he weighed his options. The Vraxis had become more than an alien soldier. It had become something more personal to him, someone he couldn't abandon. Not now. The question was, could he survive this? "Eric," the Vraxis said softly, as if reading his mind, "you can either walk away now or die with them. The choice is yours." The commander's voice rang out again, this time with an edge of desperation. "I'll count to 3, Captain. Then we take you by force." Eric's gaze flicked from the Vraxis to the commander and back again. In that moment, everything inside him screamed to choose survival, to surrender and go back to the life he knew. But he couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. 2. The Vraxis moved. It wasn't a step. It wasn't even a lunge. It was a blur of motion, faster than Eric could track. In an instant, the Vraxis was at the commander's side, its claws outstretched. The soldiers froze, but it was too late. The alien was already moving, disarming the commander and knocking him to the ground in a fluid, practiced motion. "Stay back," the Vraxis growled at the soldiers, its eyes glowing brighter. The power in its voice was undeniable. "I will not hesitate to end this now." Eric watched in stunned silence as the Vraxis held the commander at bay. He had never seen anything like it. The alien was a force of nature, an unstoppable whirlwind. But Eric wasn't sure where it would stop. If the Vraxis decided to fight, they would all be dead. He took a step forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Enough, Vraxis." The alien turned its head to look at him, its expression unreadable. Eric could see the raw energy that crackled around it, but he also saw something else. Uncertainty. The alien's eyes softened for a moment, and Eric realized that the Vraxis, for all its power, was still uncertain. It wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for something more. "Let them go," Eric said, his voice firm but calm. "We're leaving, and we're not going to let anyone stand in our way." The Vraxis hesitated for just a second, then slowly released the commander. With one last warning glance, it stepped back, giving Eric the space he needed to act. The commander, gasping for breath, glared at Eric with hatred in his eyes. "You've made a mistake, Captain," he spat. "This isn't over." Eric didn't respond. He only nodded to the Vraxis. The alien turned, and together they walked toward the exit, leaving the soldiers behind. But Eric knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Eric and the Vraxis moved swiftly through the ruined city. The streets quiet except for the sound of their footsteps and the occasional distant explosion. The air felt heavy, thick with the sense of danger lurking in every corner. Though they had escaped the soldiers, Eric knew it wasn't over. It would never be over until they were far beyond the reach of the command and the rebel forces. "Where are we going?" Eric asked, his voice low as they turned a corner, heading deeper into the shadows of the city. His mind was a blur of thoughts, but one thing was clear. They needed to find a safe place, somewhere the enemy couldn't track them. The Vraxis was moving with an eerie calm, its gaze fixed ahead, as if it already knew the way. "There's a hideout, a place not even your people know about. A place where we can regroup and plan." Eric nodded, his pulse quickening. He trusted the Vraxis, but even so, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of his mind. They were being hunted, by both sides, and with every step, the danger grew closer. "They'll come for us," Eric muttered. "I know they will." The Vraxis glanced at him, its red eyes glowing faintly. "You think they will stop after today? Your people will not let you walk away so easily, but neither will I." Eric gave a quiet laugh, though it was tinged with bitterness. "You don't need to worry about me. I can handle them. It's you I'm worried about. You got enemies everywhere." "I have lived through worse," the Vraxis replied, its voice steady and confident. "You human have yet to understand the price of mercy." Eric fell silent at that. He had no idea what the Vraxis meant by that, but it was clear the aliens' past was as dark as the path they now walked. They reached a small building, half collapsed but still standing. It was hidden in the shadows, concealed by fallen debris and thick vines that had overtaken the structure. The entrance was barely visible, but the Vraxis knew exactly where to go. Without a word, the alien stepped forward, pushing aside a chunk of rubble to reveal a narrow passage. "This is it," the Vraxis said quietly, turning back to Eric. "Once we're inside, we'll be safe, but you must stay alert. There are those who would use this place for their own gain." Eric hesitated for a moment, his instincts screaming to be cautious. But the truth was, he had nowhere else to go, and the Vraxis had already shown that it could take care of itself. Together, they would have to face whatever was waiting inside. He followed the alien into the dark passageway, the cold air of the underground hitting him like a slap. The darkness was nearly suffocating, the only light coming from the Vraxis' glowing eyes. Eric strained his own eyes, trying to make sense of the surroundings. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols he didn't understand. "What is this place?" Eric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A refuge," the Vraxis replied, "built by those who did not trust the leaders of either side. A place where we can hide from the war." The passage twisted and turned, winding deeper into the earth. It felt like they were descending into another world entirely, away from the chaos above. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached a chamber. The room was vast, its walls lined with old, rusted machinery. But it wasn't the machinery that caught Eric's attention. It was the people. The room was filled with refugees, a mix of humans and alien beings, all huddled together in silence. They watched the two newcomers with wary eyes, unsure whether to trust them or not. Eric's throat tightened. These were the people who had been abandoned, those who had nowhere left to go. He could see the exhaustion in their faces, the weight of years of war hanging over them. Some looked hopeful, others resigned to their fate. "Are these your people?" Eric asked, his voice soft. The Vraxis nodded, but there was no pride in the gesture. "Not all of them, but they are my brothers and sisters now." Eric felt a knot form in his stomach. These people had been forgotten by the world above, left to fend for themselves, while the war raged on. He could see the Vraxis' deep connection to them, a bond born out of shared hardship. "They're counting on us," Eric said, turning to the Vraxis. "But how do we fight this war? How do we fight both sides when they're both hunting us?" The Vraxis didn't answer immediately. Instead, it turned its gaze to the refugees, its eyes scanning the room. There was a moment of silence before the alien spoke again. "We don't. We survive. Together." Eric felt the weight of those words. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight and kill. But this was different. This wasn't a war between enemies. It was a fight for survival. And the Vraxis had a point. They couldn't keep fighting forever. They would have to find another way. But before Eric could say anything else, a loud crash echoed from the entrance of the hideout. The sound of boots, heavy and fast, filled the air. "They found us," Eric whispered, his eyes widening in realization. The Vraxis didn't flinch. It simply turned toward the door, its body tense, ready for whatever was about to come. "Get ready," the alien said, its voice low. "This is only the beginning." Eric's hand went instinctively to his weapon, but he wasn't sure if it would be enough. They were about to face something far worse than anything they had encountered before. The walls that had kept them safe were crumbling, and their only chance now was to fight, not for victory, but for survival. And then the door exploded open. The door splintered with a deafening crack, and the room went instantly silent. The refugees huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Eric's heart pounded in his chest, his hand gripping his weapon as he instinctively moved to stand in front of the Vraxis. But even as he braced for the worst, he knew this would be no ordinary fight. Through the dust and smoke, figures began to emerge, soldiers, armed and ready, their faces hard and unforgiving. They stormed into the room with ruthless precision, their weapons trained on everyone in sight. The first wave was human, but the second wave, Eric's blood ran cold. It wasn't just humans coming for them. It was a squad of Vraxis soldiers, their eyes cold and emotionless, their bodies armored and battle-ready. "Stay behind me!" Eric barked to the refugees, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. He took a step forward, positioning himself between the Vraxis and the approaching enemies. The Vraxis beside him shifted, its glowing red eyes scanning the room, the air around it crackling with energy. "You don't have to fight," the Vraxis said, its voice low, but filled with power. "I can handle them." But Eric shook his head. "We fight together, Vraxis. That's the only way we survive." The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. The soldiers and the Vraxis soldiers seemed to hesitate, their gazes flicking between each other. But they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence before the storm was always the deadliest part of any battle. And then, without warning, the first soldier fired. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence and chaos erupted. Eric reacted instinctively, diving to the side as a burst of plasma fire shot past him, narrowly missing. The refugees screamed, ducking for cover behind any obstacle they could find. The Vraxis beside him snarled, its claws flashing in the low light as it charged toward the soldiers. With a speed that Eric could barely follow, the alien warrior tore through the first wave of human soldiers, incapacitating them in seconds. But the Vraxis soldiers were different. They didn't falter. They didn't hesitate. Eric fired his weapon, the loud crack of his gun cutting through the noise. One of the Vraxis soldiers crumpled, but the others advanced, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The alien soldiers were fierce, and their strength was unimaginable. They fought with the precision of a machine, each movement calculated, each strike landing with brutal efficiency. But the refugees weren't helpless. Some of them had been soldiers once, before they were abandoned by the war. They picked up whatever weapons they could find and began to fight back. Eric could hear the sound of weapons firing, the sharp crack of plasma shots, the clang of metal against metal. The Vraxis and Eric fought side by side, a seamless partnership formed in the heat of battle. Eric knew the alien's moves by now, and the Vraxis seemed to anticipate his every action. They moved together like a well-oiled machine, each one covering the other's back, each one fighting for the same cause. But the battle was far from even. The Vraxis soldiers were relentless, and the refugees were outnumbered. Eric could see the exhaustion creeping into their faces, the weight of the battle taking its toll. They needed to get out. They needed to survive. "Vraxis!" Eric shouted, his voice strained as he ducked behind a pile of rubble. "We can't win this fight. We need to escape." The alien warrior's eyes met his, its gaze filled with an unspoken understanding. It was a brutal truth. They couldn't stay here. The odds were stacked against them. "We will fight until the last breath," the Vraxis said, its voice low but fierce. "But you are right. We must survive." The two of them exchanged a glance, and in that moment, Eric understood what the alien meant. Survival wasn't about winning. It was about living to fight another day. They couldn't take down the entire enemy force, but they could make their escape. The Vraxis turned toward the refugees, its voice commanding, "Run, now." The refugees hesitated for a moment, but they didn't need any more convincing. They fled, scattering in every direction, seeking the exits to the underground complex. The soldiers were focused on Eric and the Vraxis, leaving the refugees their chance to escape. "Go!" Eric shouted again, urging them forward. He fired his weapon again, providing cover fire as they ran. The Vraxis continued to hold its ground, moving with terrifying speed and precision, taking down one enemy after another. But Eric could see the toll it was taking. The alien's movements were slower now, its energy fading. Even the Vraxis couldn't keep up this pace forever. "Get out!" the Vraxis shouted as it fought off another soldier. "I will hold them off." Eric's heart clenched. He didn't want to leave the Vraxis behind, but he knew it was the only way. The alien had given him a chance to survive, and he wasn't going to waste it. He turned and ran, his legs burning as he sprinted toward the nearest exit. His eyes flicked back to the Vraxis one last time. The alien was surrounded now, but it was still fighting, still relentless. Eric gritted his teeth, forcing himself to keep moving. But just as he reached the door, a massive explosion shook the ground. The air seemed to ripple with heat and force as the explosion sent a shockwave through the complex. The building trembled, and for a split second, Eric thought it might collapse altogether. He stumbled, his heart racing as dust filled the air, but he kept moving. His mission wasn't over. They weren't safe yet, but one thing was clear: he had to survive, for the Vraxis, for the refugees, for everything they lost. And when the dust settled, he knew the fight was far from over. Eric staggered through the ruins, his body aching from the battle, his mind still reeling from the explosion that had shaken the ground beneath his feet. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and he could barely make out the outlines of the crumbling buildings in front of him. His breath was ragged, and his heart pounded in his chest. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Behind him, the underground complex was in chaos. The explosion had torn through the hideout, collapsing walls, and causing fires to rage through the wreckage. The refugees had scattered, but Eric had no idea if any of them had made it out alive. The Vraxis, he hadn't seen it since the explosion. It had sacrificed itself to buy them a chance to escape. He could only hope the alien had made it out too. He reached the edge of the ruined city, where the landscape began to open up into barren fields. The distant sound of gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, but it was no longer close. The soldiers had either retreated or were focused elsewhere. For now, Eric was alone. But he wasn't without hope. In the chaos of the fight, Eric had seen something. As he'd fled, he'd caught a glimpse of a small group of refugees, their faces determined, holding their ground and fighting for survival. It had been a moment of unity, a moment that showed him there was more to this war than the endless conflict between sides. There was something deeper, a shared struggle, a shared hope for a better future. Eric didn't know how, but he knew that hope was what kept them going. It was what had kept the Vraxis going too. As he trudged through the fields, he found himself at the edge of a dense forest, its trees dark and imposing in the twilight. A sense of urgency pressed against him, but he couldn't ignore the strange feeling of peace that washed over him in the midst of all this destruction. He dropped to his knees, feeling the weight of the day bearing down on him. The explosion, the fight, the loss of the Vraxis, everything. But amid the pain and uncertainty, there was one thing that kept him going. The realization that he hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Then, through the smoke and the haze, he saw something moving. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Eric's heart skipped a beat. It was the Vraxis. The alien's body was covered in scars, its armor dented and battered. But it was still standing. There was a flicker of exhaustion in its eyes, but there was no mistaking the strength in its stance. It had made it out. "Vraxis!" Eric exclaimed, his voice full of relief and disbelief. "You made it." The alien gave a faint nod, its voice low, but filled with quiet pride. "You did not think I would let you down, did you, human?" Eric shook his head, a smile spreading across his face despite the exhaustion that clung to his every movement. "I didn't think you'd let me down, but I wasn't sure you'd make it out. That explosion was." "Explosions are nothing," the Vraxis interrupted, its tone grim. "We have bigger battles ahead of us." Eric nodded, his smile fading as the gravity of the situation hit him again. They weren't safe. The war was still ongoing. They still had enemies to face, and there was no guarantee they would survive this fight. But in that moment, something changed. The fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming odds. None of it mattered as much anymore. They had made it this far. Together. "We have to keep moving," Eric said, standing up and brushing the dirt off his clothes. "We can't stop now. The refugees. The refugees are not your concern, the Vraxis said, its tone sharper now. The war is. They have to make their own way, just as you and I do. Eric hesitated, but then he realized the truth in the alien's words. They couldn't carry the weight of everyone's survival. They had to focus on the fight ahead, on surviving the war, on making sure there was a future to fight for. But we can't leave them behind. Eric said quietly. We can't abandon them. We won't, the Vraxis replied firmly. Not if we win. Eric nodded, the fire of determination lighting in his chest once more. Then let's fight. The Vraxis stepped forward, its body glowing with an eerie light. There is a place, a secret stronghold hidden deep in the mountains. There we will find the power we need to end this war. A secret stronghold? Eric asked, raising an eyebrow. You knew about this? Not just me, the Vraxis said, but others like me. There are those who want to end the war, not with destruction, but with unity. We will join them. A plan was forming in Eric's mind, a plan that could change everything. He could see the path ahead, a glimmer of hope in the distance. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. We're not alone, Eric said, his voice steady. We've got to find them. We've got to make this work. The Vraxis nodded. And we will. Together. With that, they turned away from the fields and began to make their way into the mountains. The journey ahead would be dangerous, filled with obstacles, and there was no guarantee of success. But as long as they had each other and the hope that burned between them, they would keep moving forward. And that, Eric knew, was enough.